"Get out of here before I call the police," shouted Margaret Thompson, president of the neighborhood association, pointing to the accusing finger to the 40-year-old woman who carefully organized her homemade sweets on a small folding table on the sidewalk. "This kind of illegal trade is not allowed in Maple Heights." Around, neighbors stopped to watch the show. Some shook their heads with disapproval. Others whispered comments on these immigrants who do not respect the rules of the country. An elderly couple crossed across the street, as if the presence of that woman was contagious. Elena Rodriguez remained silent, her hands continuing to tidy up the brigadeiros, kisses and cocadas with a disconcerting calm. At 42, it was not the first time he had faced this kind of confrontation since he had started selling his sweets at the corner of the main street 3 months ago. "Did you hear me?" Margaret got closer, her voice echoing in the sunny morning on Saturday. His designer bag shook as he gestured dramatically. "We have no license for street vendors here, let alone—" She paused, looking at Elena from below. "People like you." The crowd grew. Smartphones began to be raised, but not to defend Elena. They were to film what they considered a necessary cleaning of the upper-middle-class neighborhood. "That's right, Margaret," he shouted someone from the audience. "First it's a saleswoman, then they'll come more. Soon this place will become a slum." Elena finally looked up. Her brown eyes found Margaret's with a serenity that made the woman instinctively retreat one step. "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Thompson," said Elena in perfect English with just a slight accent that denounced her origins. "I'll collect my things." Margaret blinked, surprised by the impeccable fluency. He expected shouts, supplications, or at least some resistance that justified his aggressive tone. "Well, that's right," stammered, recovering the composure. "And don't come back. We have children in this neighborhood, and we don't know where these sweets come from." Elena folded her table meticulously, each calculated and accurate movement, while keeping the candy in a professional thermal box, not the makeshift container Margaret hoped to see. Something in his behavior suggested that this was not a defeat. It was just the first movement of a much more complex game. The crowd that had formed expected to see Elena out humiliated, defeated, perhaps even crying. But while organizing his things with almost military efficiency, his gestures revealed a discipline that did not match the stereotype that those people had formed. Margaret smiled triumphantly to her neighbors. "See, just show firmness that they understand the message. These people only respect authority." Her husband, Robert Thompson, CEO of a local construction company, appeared on the porch. "Good job, honey. We can't let the value of properties fall because of this situation." What no one there knew was that Elena was not just an immigrant selling sweets on the street. Behind that apparent simplicity, a past was hidden that Margaret Thompson and his prejudiced neighbors could never imagine. A past that made that public humiliation not only unfair, but dangerously ironic. As he walked slowly down the sidewalk carrying his things, Elena allowed an almost imperceptible smile. She hadn't felt so underestimated for a long time, and that she knew from her own experience it was always a strategic advantage. At the corner, before she disappeared, she turned one last time. His gaze slowly swept each face in the crowd, as if memorizing every person who had witnessed that public humiliation. Margaret waved exaggeratedly, as if he was expelling an unwanted animal. Elena nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before disappearing from everyone's sight. If you are enjoying this story of how a simple candy saleswoman was about to turn the game against people who completely underestimated her, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out the secret that no one imagined about this extraordinary woman. In the days following the incident, Margaret Thompson could not stop talking about his victory against the street vendor. During ladies' tea on Tuesday, she recreated the scene dramatically to her friends from local high society. "You should have seen how it came out of Cabezbaixa." Margaret laughed, stirring her Earl Grey tea with a silver spoon inherited from the great-grandmother. "These people only understand when we show firmness. My Robert always says that we need to keep the standards of the neighborhood, otherwise it becomes a zone." Susan Whitmore, wife of the local judge, shook his head by approving while pinching a French macaron. "You did it right, Margaret. First a saleswoman, then comes a beggar trafficker. Soon our neighborhood becomes those troubled places we see on television." "Exactly," agreed Patricia Mills, owner of the most expensive real estate in the city. "Did you save our real estate value? Imagine if this becomes fashionable. An invasion of street vendors in our Maple Heights." While the ladies laughed and planned a surveillance patrol to prevent future invasions, Elena had found another place to sell her sweets, a 3-block out public square. But something had changed her after that Saturday. His movements were more calculated. His eyes observed every detail around with almost military accuracy. "Discuss, senora," said a Hispanic child of about 8 years shyly approaching his table. Mi mamá quiere to know cuánto cuesta el brigadeiro. Elena smiled genuinely for the first time in days. For you, Piss, 2 for $1. She wrapped the candy with a special affection. And take this kiss to your mother with my greetings. The child's mother approached, visibly thrilled. Muy amable, señora Elena. In the encuentro work since has months. Mi esposo fue deportado, y I understand perfectly. Elena responded in a fluent Spanish, her voice loaded with a deep understanding. Sometimes opportunities appear in the most unexpected places. Have faith. While the family walked away with tears in his eyes, Elena discreetly pulled a smartphone last model of her pocket. Nothing like what someone would expect to see in the hands of a street vendor. Its fingers slid down the screen with familiarity, accessing apps that few knew how to use right. She quickly typed, full research on Margaret and Robert Thompson, Maple Heights. I need everything. Financial, professional, personal, including tax history, business licenses, and possible irregularities. Deadline, 48 hours. The answer came in seconds. Considering your history of previous jobs, Dr. Rodriguez, this will be mold. Value, $500. You can start immediately. Elena smiled almost imperceptibly. $500 was what she earned in 2 weeks selling sweets. But there were things that were worth much more than money, especially when it came to restoring dignity. That afternoon, Robert Thompson was in his construction company when he received an unexpected call. Mr. Thompson, here is from City Hall, Department of Business Licenses and Environmental Inspection. We are investigating a complaint about irregularities in his works in the Maple Heights region. Ah, what kind of irregularities? Robert tried to keep his voice calm, but a drop of cold sweat descended by his forehead. Apparently, your company started buildings without a valid permit on Elm Street. In addition, we have detailed documents about serious environmental violations and security issues. Can you explain us why the works began before full environmental approval? Robert's blood froze. Those illegal works were his best-kept secret, a shortcut that had saved $500,000 in licenses and environmental studies. This must be some mistake, he stammered, loosening the tie. Unfortunately not, sir. We have here dated photos, engineering documents, and even compromising conversation recordings. A very well-informed source provided us with quite detailed material. While Robert stammered, trying to give inconsistent explanations, Elena carefully kept her cell phone. His first play had been placed on the board with the surgical accuracy of those who knew exactly where to tighten to cause maximum damage. Margaret, completely oblivious to her husband's problems, decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to watch over if the street vendor had returned. That's when he noticed a van with the Channel 7 News logo parked around the corner where Elena used to stay. Excuse me, she approached the reporting team, already imagining the opportunity to appear on television as the heroine of the community. Are you from local television? Reporter James Martinez smiled professionally. Channel 7 News. We are doing a special story about systematic discrimination against small immigrant entrepreneurs in the metropolitan region. Do you happen to meet a candy salesman who was expelled from here last Saturday? Margaret's face paled instantly, as if every color had been sucked from his cheeks. We have here a video that went viral on social networks, continued the reporter, showing the screen of the cell phone. A blonde woman, apparently community leader, publicly humiliating a working immigrant. Do you recognize this person? Margaret saw her own image shouting, "People like you and this kind of illegal trade," for a clearly helpless woman. The video had already been seen by more than 50,000 people, and they were devastating. I can explain, Margaret babbled, realizing that cameras were recording their reaction in real time. What none of those privileged people could realize was that every word of contempt that had spit, every arrogant gesture, every moment of free cruelty, had been carefully documented and filed by someone who perfectly understood the power of public exposure. Elena was not just a candy saleswoman. She was someone who knew how to turn injustice into fuel for something much bigger and more devastating than any of them could imagine. Each act of discrimination had been meticulously catalogued, and now these same acts would return to haunt them in ways that their privileged minds could never anticipate. While Robert Thompson desperately tried to contain the disaster that was slaughtered about his construction company, Elena had returned to her sales routine in the public square, but something had changed fundamentally in his posture. His movements were more accurate, his more calculating look, and there was a contained energy that suggested storms forming on the horizon. "Señora Elena," said a young Mexican approaching his table, "Mi nombre es Diego. Soy periodista independiente. I gustar hablar with usted about so that pasó in Maple Heights." Elena smiled subtly. "Of course, Diego, but first tell me, what do you know about real journalistic investigation?" The boy blinked, surprised by the question. "Bueno, I work for several local blogs. Hago investigación social." "Good, because maybe I have a story that might be very interested in your readers." Elena discreetly pulled a downstairs folder on her table. Do you know the difference between journalism and investigative justice? Diego leaned over, intrigued. What he saw in that folder made his eyes wide. Architectural plants, forged environmental reports, compromising WhatsApp conversations, illegal works, photographic records, a complete dossier about the criminal activities of Thompson Construction. How did you get all this? Diego whispered, flipping through documents that any journalist would kill to have in hand. Let's say it's not the first time I need to document corporate irregularities, Elena responded with an enigmatic smile. The question is, do you have the courage to publish the truth when it can destroy powerful people? While Diego absorbed the impact of that explosive material, Elena received a call. Dr. Rodriguez, said a female voice on the other end of the line. The documents he requested about Thompson's fiscal history are ready, and we found something interesting about his wife's discriminatory behavior pattern. Perfect. Send everything by encrypted email. And thanks for the fast work, Sarah. Diego lifted his eyes from the documents. Dr. Rodriguez, Elena kept her cell phone calmly. You assumed that I was just a street vendor. Interesting how our perceptions can fool us, right? That same afternoon, Margaret Thompson was shopping at the mall when he was approached by two elegant women she recognized as wives of local entrepreneurs. Margaret, dear, said one of them, with a fake smile, we saw the video that is circulating on the internet about you and that situation with the saleswoman. Margaret felt the blood freezing. What video? Oh, you haven't seen it? There are almost 200,000 views. Rich woman humiliating hard-working immigrant, something like that. It's being shared in all the city's WhatsApp groups. The second woman showed the cell phone. It was the video of the confrontation, but edited in order to highlight every prejudiced word, every arrogant gesture, every moment of unnecessary cruelty. The comments were devastating. What a disgust of women, privileged, clueless. I hope she loses everything. My God, Margaret murmured, realizing that her social reputation was crumbling in real time. And there is more, continued the first woman, clearly enjoying Margaret's discomfort. It seems that someone is investigating your husband's companies as well. I heard that there are serious problems with environmental licenses. Margaret ran from the mall, calling frantically to Robert. You need to do something. I'm being publicly humiliated. Margaret, I have bigger problems now, Robert replied, visibly exhausted. The city hall embarrassed 3 works. The prosecutor opened an investigation, and our business bank account was blocked. Someone handed us by tray to the authorities. While the couple Thompson saw their world collapse, Elena received visitors in her modest rented house. Dr. Marcus Williams, a civil rights lawyer, and Professor Janet Chen, a state university sociologist, had come to discuss something very important. Dr. Rodriguez, said Dr. Williams, we reviewed all the documentation you sent us. We have enough material not only to process the Thompson, but to open a legal precedent on systematic discrimination against entrepreneurial immigrants. Professor Chen nodded. Your research on economic discrimination standards is impeccable. With your permission, we would like to use this case as a main study for our new academic initiative. Elena smiled, serving tea in thin porcelain cups, another detail that did not match the image of a walking saleswoman who had all formed. Sure, but first we need to make sure justice is done completely. She opened her laptop, a state of the art professional model, and showed a detailed presentation. You see, I document not only the irregularities of the construction company, but a systematic pattern of discrimination involving at least 12 immigrant families in the region. Dr. Williams whistled softly. This is material for a millionaire collective action. Exactly. Elena clicked for the next screen. And tomorrow, during the meeting of the Residents Association that Margaret summoned to defend themselves from the accusations, they will find out exactly who they were moving. Professor Chen leaned. Dr. Rodriguez, I can ask what was your area before? Cell suites? Elena smiled, her eyes shining with an intensity that made both visitors realize that they had completely underestimated that extraordinary woman. Socioeconomic investigation and combat systematic discrimination. I worked 15 years documenting how privileged people use economic power to marginalize minorities. She paused. Margaret and Robert Thompson have just become my most interesting study case. It was when everyone laughed at the humiliated candy saleswoman that something much more powerful began to take shape. Not just personal revenge, but a social justice operation that would reveal the true face of people who hid behind privileges to practice impuses. The Maple Heights Association meeting had been summoned by Margaret Thompson as a desperate attempt to clarify the misunderstandings about the incident with the street vendor. The community hall was crowded, not only with curious residents, but with journalists, activists, and even representatives of the prosecutor. Margaret entered the hall with all the confidence he managed to gather, wearing his best ensemble and mentally rehearsing the speech about protecting community values. Beside her, Robert tried to hide his nervousness while obsessively checked his cell phone, waiting for news from lawyers trying to contain the disaster of his construction company. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret started, her voice echoing through the microphone, "you have known my family for over 15 years. You know we have always defended the best interests of this community." That's when Elena Rodriguez entered the back door, accompanied by Dr. Marcus Williams, Professor Janet Chen, and Diego, the young journalist. But it was no longer the humiliated Elena a week ago. He wore an elegant blazer, carried an executive leather paste, and walked with the authority of those who were about to conduct a business council meeting. Margaret stuttered as he saw her. What is she doing here?" Elena went to the microphone calmly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thompson. I believe this meeting was summoned to discuss discrimination against local entrepreneurs. As the main interested, I would like to present some clarifications." "You have no right to," Margaret started, but her voice died when Elena opened her folder and removed an official identification. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Ph.D. in Economic Sociology from Stanford University, a systematic discrimination expert and U.S. Department of Justice consultant for civil rights violations. His voice was clear, professional, and devastatingly calm. "Over the past 3 months, I have conducted a disguised ethnographic investigation into discriminatory practices in high-income communities." The silence in the hall was deafening. Margaret felt her legs weakened. Maple Heights was selected as a case of study after anonymous reports on systematic standards of racial and economic exclusion. During this period, I document 47 incidents of discrimination against 12 different immigrant families. Elena triggered a projector. The first image showed Margaret shouting, "People like you," to Elena on the sidewalk. The second showed Robert Thompson ordering security to expel Hispanic workers from their works without payment. "Mrs. Thompson," Elena continued, "during our interaction filmed and widely publicized, you violated not only civil conduct codes, but also federal laws of rights civilians, specifically the 1964 Civil Rights Law and the Fair Housing Law." Margaret tried to interrupt, but Elena raised her hand politely. "Mr. Robert Thompson, his construction company is being investigated for 23 environmental violations, 15 cases of illegal labor practices, and systematic tax evasion worth $2.8 million. All properly documented and delivered to the competent authorities." Robert was livid. Where did you get this information?" Elena smiled. "Mr. Thompson, you really believe that a doctor in economic sociology with 15 years of investigative experience would not know how to document corporate irregularities?" Dr. Williams got up. "To the authorities present, I inform you that my office today fits a collective civil action of $50 million against the Thompson and the Association of Residents for systematic discrimination and collective moral damages." Professor Chen has added, "The State University will publish a complete study on this case next week, which will become a national reference on how privileged use residents' associations to practice racial exclusion, disguised as standard maintenance." Diego raised his camera. "And I publish tomorrow a complete 6-month investigation into the corruption network that connects Thompson Construction with illegal approvals to City Hall, with names, dates, and values." Margaret collapsed in the chair. Around her, neighbors who supported her minutes earlier began to get away discreetly. Some already whispered about how always they suspicious of something wrong. "Wait," Margaret begged, but her voice was just a whisper. We didn't know. I'm not racist." Elena approached, speaking low enough to just Margaret hear. "Mrs. Thompson, for 3 months I slept worried about money for rent while selling candy in the rain. Not because I needed it. My savings would cover years of comfortable life, but because I wanted to feel on the skin what people like me when they are humiliated by people like you." Margaret looked into Elena's eyes and saw something that made her realize the magnitude of what she had triggered. "The difference between us," Elena continued, "is that I temporarily chose to live as poor to fight injustice. You have chosen to use privilege to cause suffering. Now you will learn that consequences are inevitable when attacking who has knowledge, resources, and especially a fair cause." Robert tried to get out of the hall discreetly, but was intercepted by federal agents waiting for him at the door. The handcuffs shone under the lights of the hall, while he was informed of his rights. While the cameras captured every second of Thompson's humiliation, Elena smiled subtly. It was not a smile of cruel revenge, but of justice finally served with the scientific accuracy that only someone of his formation could provide. What no one in that hall could still process completely was that they had just witnessed not only the fall of an arrogant family, but the birth of a legal precedent that would protect hundreds of other immigrant families from similar humiliations. 6 months after the meeting that destroyed the Thompson Elena Rodriguez was sitting at her new office in the city center, with panoramic views for the entire metropolitan region. The plate on the door shone discreetly, Rodriguez Institute, Fight Against Systematic Discrimination. Beside him, Diego finished editing the documentary that would lead the story of Maple Heights to the whole country. "Dr. Rodriguez," said his new assistant, "the Justice Department confirmed that its report will be used as the basis for the new federal legislation on housing discrimination, and Netflix approved the documentary for national launch." Elena smiled, watching the square where she still sold candy occasionally watched through the window, now for pleasure, not out of necessity. His investigation had become the largest case of civil rights of the decade, generating changes in public policies that would protect thousands of immigrant families. "And the Thompson?" asked Diego, pausing the addition. "Margaret has lost all friends of high society and is being sued by 47 different families. He had to sell the mansion to pay the first compensation." Elena flipped a local newspaper. Robert was sentenced to 8 years in prison for corruption and environmental crimes. The construction company went to complete bankruptcy. Dr. Marcus Williams entered the office carrying a bulky folder. "Elena, we have 200 new cases similar to Maple Heights this month alone. Your disguised ethnographic research method is revolutionizing as we fight systematic discrimination." Professor Janet Chen joined them via video chamada. "Your study is already a mandatory reference in 15 universities. We can document that communities like Maple Heights exists in all 50 states, practicing racial exclusion disguised as maintenance of patterns." Elena got up and walked to the window. Down on the same corner where Margaret had humiliated her, now a community center that offered free legal support for immigrants. Irony could not be more perfect. "Do you know what satisfies me most?" Elena said, turning to Diego. "It's not seeing Margaret ruined or Robert in prison. It is knowing that 12 Hispanic families have bought homes in Maple Heights in recent months, using the compensation they have received." Diego smiled. "And they all know it was a Brigaderos seller who made it possible." "A former Brigaderos advisor," Elena corrected, laughing. "Now I'm just a sociologist who discovered the power to disguise her own competence to expose the true face of those who hide behind privileges." Dr. Williams leafed his documents. "Elena, the impact goes beyond compensation. Its methodology is being replicated in other countries. Canada and Australia have already requested consulting." At that moment, Elena received a message on her cell phone. It was a photo sent by Carla Santos, one of the immigrant mothers she had met in the square, her 8-year-old daughter holding a certificate of best student at Maple Heights Private School. "This is true revenge," Elena showed the photo to everyone. "Not destroying those who harm us, but build a world where next generations never have to go through what we have been through." Diego paused the recording of the interview. "Dr. Rodriguez, what advice would you give to people who face discrimination today?" Elena thought for a moment. "Do you do everything? Study your oppressors, organize with intelligence, and remember, the best revenge is not to demean who demean us. It is to climb so loud that they can never reach us again." Margaret Thompson, at that very moment, was in a 2-bedroom rented apartment watching the national news that displayed Elena receiving a Medal of Honor to merit for her contribution to civil rights. Beside her, Robert answered another call of lawyers trying to negotiate his sentence. "Do you notice now?" Margaret muttered to her husband. "The woman we humiliated was not any street vendor. He was one of the most respected sociologists in the country pretending to be poor to expose us." Robert hung up the phone and stared at the television. 15 years of career, an empire of 50 million, all destroyed by underestimating a woman selling brigadeiros around the corner. Meanwhile, Elena finished another day at the institute she had created with Thompson's compensation money. On the wall of her funny office was her picture selling candy around the corner, a permanent reminder that appearances are deceiving and that justice, when served with intelligence and patience, has an incomparably sweet flavor. She has learned that true revenge is not to destroy who has harmed you. It is to build something bigger than they could never destroy. If you have already had discrimination or injustice, count on the comments as you reacted, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories that prove that sometimes the universe only needs a little help from ours to restore balance.